I'm Scott Norton, and I'm a condiment expert. Wow. Let's dive in. So we'll start with ketchup A here. Smooth, glossy, reflecting a lot of the light that comes off it with the sheen. And we'll give it a sniff. Some sweetness that we smell, and a little bit of spice. You can also start to see a little bit of water pooling around the edges of ketchup A. Water is leaching out of the tomato particles, out of those cell walls, which have collapsed when cooking, and this we call syneresis. This is a bit of a gloopy product, definitely an industrial ketchup that is really quintessential for a ketchup. In ketchup B, texture is radically different. You see almost a chunkiness here, something that has little ridges, a little bit less syneresis, and is generally more of a textured product. Giving that a sniff, it's more muted, less tartness, a little less sweetness, not as much spice, and maybe a little bit more bitter. And this is actually a looser product. As you can see here, it's actually got less viscosity, and it's dripping off the spoon. So first we're going to taste ketchup A here, and what better to dip it in than its best friend, the French fry. I'm going to dip that in there, give it a munch. It's a nice salty fry, and we get the acid, and we get the sweetness of the ketchup coming through. Definitely a classic compliment. All right, let's move to ketchup B. Now let's give this the fry test. Coats the fry very well. Doesn't have the acid that it needs, doesn't have the saltiness that it needs, even with the presence of salt on the French fry. I have to say, this is definitely a different ketchup than a classic ketchup. Ketchup A is something that is going to immediately speak to us because it's the ketchup of our childhood. A ketchup that we formed an emotional bond with when it was one of the first foods that we could actually control ourselves at the dinner table when our parents gave us a bottle of the stuff. You know that this ketchup has a big market, a big audience. This is the ubiquitous ketchup in America. And because of that ubiquity, there's very high production volumes, which allows the price to decrease. Whereas ketchup B here is likely made with a more artisanal small batch process. My wager would be that ketchup A is the cheaper of these two ketchups and ketchup B is the more expensive. So let's find out. There's a huge difference here. Ketchup B is almost 9 times as expensive as ketchup A. That is a massive difference when we think about two things that have the same name and are more or less the same product. So just because these two ketchups have very different price points doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other. Don't let anyone tell you what ketchup you should or shouldn't be eating based on nostalgia or based on the culinary arts. In fact, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and nowhere is that more true than in ketchup. Two delicious looking mayonnaises. Clearly, we immediately see a difference in color, with Mayo A being a little bit more yellow, a little bit more golden, maybe communicating to us that there's a higher egg yolk content. Mayo A, quite mild, a little bit vinegary, a little bit sour. You can see from the texture here that this one is really thick without a lot of air pockets in it. This is really like a homemade mayo. It has stiff peaks and holds its character really, really well with a nice yellowish color. And in Mayo B, we have something that's a bit more white, perhaps less eggy. Mayo B, pretty inert. Not a lot of flavor coming off of this one. And looking at the texture, it's a bit more gloopy and anemic with less stiff peaks and higher air content. An air content like this would suggest that perhaps it was made more with an industrial mill than with a typical home-style blending method. So why don't we taste Mayo A? Let's dunk one of these bad boys in there and see what we get. Great mouthfeel, really complements the starch in the fries and the salt in the fries, and that fat carries the flavors and dials them up. So now Mayo B, let's give it the fry test. We give a dip here. Texture is actually quite nice, cloud-like. It doesn't quite hold up to the fry. It doesn't accentuate the saltiness, and I can taste that synthetic preservative that I don't love as much. I can also taste far less egginess, far less of that rich and savory flavor that you get from Mayo A, which would suggest to me that this has less egg yolk in it. Looking at both Mayo A and Mayo B, I would wager to guess that Mayo B is the less expensive of the two, so let's see where we're ending up. Well, the proof is in the pudding. At much higher price point, we have Mayo A at 74 cents an ounce, and much less expensive 14 cents an ounce for Mayo B. So a very wide margin between the price of these two mayos. If you're shopping for mayo, you want to look for a mayo that does have a relatively high calorie count, something that packs a punch when it comes to fat. That's going to drive a delicious texture, that's going to lubricate your sandwich better, and that's going to stand up great in something like a tuna salad or a potato salad. Looks like we have two mustards here. My guess is that these are actually two different types of mustard. This one is likely a yellow, and this one is either a Dijon mustard or it's a yellow mustard that has oxidized and gone off. Let's try mustard A. Let's give it a sniff. We get some acid on the nose, and it's pungent and a bit spicy. So something that we should remember with mustard is that there are a couple different types of spiciness or heat. There's the spiciness and the heat that we know from chili peppers, which comes from capsaicin, kind of burns the mouth. That's very different than the type of heat that you get from mustard, which is a gustatory heat that actually is felt in the nose. This is a mustard that has a bit of that gustatory heat, though it isn't an intense spicy mustard. We'll start with a tasting spoon here. You see, when we look at this yellow mustard right here, it's got a strong, vibrant hue, which comes from both the yellow mustard seeds and the turmeric, which is bright yellow. It's totally homogeneous. This one doesn't have any flecks of anything in it. And with mustard B, it's a bit more mild, almost a bit sweeter actually, and less spicy in the nose. This mustard here, when we look at it closely, we'll see that there are these little brown flecks in a sea of light golden yellow. Those brown flecks are likely the exterior of the brown mustard seed and give it more of a pungent flavor. So now why don't we try giving them a taste? Let's taste it with a pairing, in this case, a pretzel. Really nice, really flavorful, though the bitterness comes through additionally as we have the salt and the crunchiness of this pretzel here. Looking at mustard B, so we'll taste it with a pretzel. Sophisticated, yet strong. This is a mustard that, unlike this mustard here, actually pairs quite nicely with the pretzel and complements the saltiness and the crunchiness of this pretzel. So looking at these two mustards, our yellow mustard over here, which is very vibrant and straight ahead, and our Dijon mustard over here, I can likely infer some differences in quality and cost and in price points. There are three types of mustard seeds. The first is yellow, which is likely what mustard A is made out of. Yellow in color and potent, but not overly spicy. The second type of mustard seed is a brown mustard seed that has an exterior which is brown and an interior which is lighter. That's likely what mustard B is made out of. Third type of mustard seed is an oriental mustard seed. It's stronger and it's much more rare to find oriental mustard in America. The price of mustard seeds doesn't vary that much, but the price of the white wine, which likely went into this Dijon mustard, and the scale of production that a yellow mustard like this probably enjoys, would lead me to believe that this is the less expensive mustard of the two, and this is the more expensive mustard. So let's see what we get. All right, the Dijon is 4 times as expensive as the yellow. That's a significant difference in price and likely to be expected. Dijon mustard is famously a premium product, as evidenced in advertisements of 2 people in Rolls Royces coming next to each other and asking each other for a product like that. This is a more quotidian mustard, but it's hard to find a bad mustard. If you're eating a simple hot dog, a ballpark frank, this might be the perfect mustard to complement it. But you might not put this on a cheese board. Instead, You might lean for something like a Dijon mustard, a milder, more complex flavor, and a decidedly more grown-up mustard. Ranch, the granddaddy of dressing. Salad dressings in America are about a $3 billion market, and ranch is 40% of that. It's by far the most popular dressing in this country, and for good reason. So let's start with Ranch A here. We immediately see that there's an off-white, almost eggshell color to it. A little bit creamy, a little bit brown. As we give it a sniff, we don't get much. It's fairly mild, not very acidic, and nutty. And I don't quite know what's driving that nutty flavor. When we look at Ranch B, we see a very similar texture, but actually almost more rubbery, almost more like Elmer's glue, and decidedly more white with more pronounced specks. As we smell it, almost no nose on this. There's not really any flavor volatiles coming off of this. It's relatively inert, but let's taste it and give it a try. So why don't we taste B with a carrot. On a carrot, it really holds its own. See, a carrot is mostly water. And so you need the saltiness and the savoriness and the intensity of the fat in this ranch dressing to balance out with a carrot. And it actually does that quite nicely. This would do the trick of making a salad taste fatty and savory and salty and basically distracting someone from recognizing that they're eating vegetables in the first place. Tasting Ranch A. Decidedly less going on here. There's less savory flavor, less fatty flavor, and this nuttiness has become almost a sweetness. I don't quite know how to describe what I'm tasting. Before we fully judge it, let's try it with a carrot stick and see what we think. It almost disappears on the carrot. Doesn't have the saltiness, doesn't have the savoriness, doesn't have the intensity and the fattiness. This is likely a lighter dressing when it comes to calorie counts and probably doesn't have any agents that make it more savory. As I look at these two ranch dressings, pretty hard to determine the quality of ingredients because the fattiness of it really overwhelms the details that you get. Likely the spices that are used are relatively similar. They, I think, both come from dry spices, though both the fattiness of this and the savoriness of this to me would suggest that this is probably a more recognizable mass-produced industrial product. And this one is maybe a less well-known brand or an off-brand of some kind. Both of them deliver that ranch flavor, but Ranch B certainly seems like it's more straight and narrow in terms of what people expect when it comes to ranch. Ranch B is the least expensive of the two, and Ranch A, with its interesting nutty flavors going on, is probably the more expensive of the two. But let's see what they are. Ta-da! 60 cents for Ranch A and 30 cents for Ranch B. Ranch A is essentially double the cost of Ranch B, and I think that's fairly consistent with what we tasted here. The tricky thing about ranch is that the flavors that you might love and respond to so much might be synthetic ingredients and chemicals that you might not want to eat. So it's really important to read the ingredient lists of ranch and all dressings that you're going to be eating and actually taste them to see what you like. You can find ranches that are natural that will taste much stronger and more potent and much more delicious than Ranch A here. So I don't necessarily want to give non-traditional ranches a bad name just because we had this experience with Ranch A. At the same time, if you like the intensity and the nostalgia factor and the savory flavors that you might get in a ranch like B, give that a try. So let's take a look at barbecue sauce A. If we pick this up and we look at the texture, we can see here that it's not very viscous. It's pretty watery, actually. The color is a nice deep red, and when we give it a sniff, it has a really satisfying flavor, a bit acidic, a bit sweet, and a bit smoky. But certainly barbecue sauce A doesn't really have any thickers in it at all, and it doesn't have enough sugar content to really make it gloopy and jammy the way that B is. As we look at barbecue sauce B, we'll see here that the texture is significantly thicker and a bit gloopier, giving it a smell. We have a lot more smokiness, a lot more sweetness. And the color, of course, is a deep brown molasses, significantly darker. And we said earlier, it's got a thicker and almost gloopy texture, which might suggest that this is a much sweeter product with a higher sugar content. Let's taste barbecue sauce A. But of course, we can't just eat it on its own. We have to eat it with at least some type of meat, even though this is not a barbecued product, but we're working with what we got. Brings wonderful tanginess, the perfect degree of smoke, the perfect degree of sweetness, and a very dippable texture. As a condimenteer myself, a true respect for what they've done with this barbecue sauce. So, how does this sweet, smoky, and ardently spiced product stack up when it's on a chicken tender? Really approachable, really easy to eat, but doesn't have the tang that I'd like. But I think if I had to guess, a kid might prefer this barbecue sauce over A because barbecue sauce B has that sweeter profile. I might think that it could be made with something like a high fructose corn syrup, which, as we know, is cheaper than a cane sugar or potentially even a fruit sugar, which is what A might be made from. Tasting barbecue sauce A and B, I would definitely guess that barbecue sauce A is the pricier of the two and barbecue sauce B is the less expensive. So what do we have here? I'm right. This is about half the price that barbecue sauce A is. But compared to some of the other condiments we've seen today, the difference of these prices, one being double, is not nearly as much as we've seen in other categories where it's been up to 4 or even 9 times in some cases. If you're actually cooking with a barbecue sauce, I would recommend a barbecue sauce that is like A, which is less sweet and more acidic. The acid is going to cook, tenderize, and marinate the meat a bit more. And also, sugar is one of the first things to caramelize. So if you were to coat a piece of meat in barbecue sauce B and then grill it, that sugar is going to carbonize. But if you don't pull it off in time, it's going to almost taste like burnt toast, which isn't a very attractive flavor. These are both really edible, approachable barbecue sauces, though I still have a favorite in A. Pardon me for double dipping. A lot of people have preconceived notions about what a condiment should or shouldn't be, but you don't necessarily have to follow that dogma or that nostalgia. Condiments are all about individualizing and adding your own flavors to food. It's about customization. So go outside your comfort zone, try new things, and follow your gut.